Married for 10 years, sexless for 8. Then I met the man who changed everything. She was 37 years old, and a reflection in the bathroom mirror at 6 a.m. told her everything she needed to know about her life. The slight hollow beneath her cheekbones, the way her eyes had grown accustomed to a particular kind of sadness she had stopped being surprised by 8 years ago. Her name was Stacy Mercer, and she lived in a 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, a house that looked from the outside like the embodiment of the American dream, but from the inside felt more like a mausoleum. Her husband, David, was a commercial real estate broker who traveled 4 days a week and slept in the guest room the other 3. They had not shared a bed in 8 years. They had not made love in 9. The last time they had been physically intimate was the night they conceived their daughter, Lily, a clinical, mechanical act that had produced a child but nothing else. No warmth. No connection. No tenderness. Stacy stood at the kitchen counter, pouring herself a second cup of coffee that she did not particularly want, just to have something to do with her hands. Through the kitchen window, she watched the autumn leaves spiral down from the oak tree in the front yard, and she thought, not for the first time, about how easily a person could disappear into the landscape of their own life and no one would notice. She was not unhappy, exactly. That would have implied she still expected something different. She had simply arrived at a state of permanent emotional neutrality, a gray area where nothing hurt because nothing felt. Her mother called it just getting on with it. Her therapist, whom she had seen for 6 sessions before deciding that paying $150 an hour to be told that her feelings mattered was not something she could afford, called it emotional numbing. Stacy called it survival. Her days followed a pattern so predictable it had become almost liturgical. Wake at 5:30. Make coffee. Wake Lily for school at 6:15. Drive Lily to school at 7:15. Come home to an empty house that echoed with the particular silence of a life unlived. Return to school at 3:15 to pick up Lily. Make dinner. Help Lily with homework. Put Lily to bed at 8:30. Sit alone in the living room with a glass of wine and the television on, not really watching, just needing the sound of another human voice in the house, even if it was only the synthetic chatter of a home renovation show or the rehearsed enthusiasm of a cable news anchor. David would come home around 9, sometimes 10, eat whatever she had left for him in the refrigerator, take a shower, and disappear into the guest room with his laptop and his phone. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. They had become 2 strangers sharing a mortgage, 2 roommates who happened to have produced a child together, 2 people who had once stood before their families and friends and promised until death do us part, and now could not even promise to acknowledge each other's existence across the breakfast table. She had tried, in the early years, to talk to him. She had suggested marriage counseling. She had asked him, gently, if something was wrong. She had even, in a moment of desperation that she still cringed to remember, initiated a conversation about whether they should consider an open marriage, a suggestion that had been met not with outrage or even discussion, but with a kind of blank incomprehension, as though she had asked him whether he preferred the blue tie or the gray tie for a meeting that did not exist. After that, she stopped trying. What was the point of reaching for someone who did not even know you were drowning? So she had learned to fill the hollow spaces with other things. She read books she did not remember reading. She took yoga classes she did not enjoy. She volunteered at Lily's school, not because she cared particularly about the school fundraiser or the book fair, but because it gave her an excuse to be around adults, to have conversations that did not involve discussing the relative merits of different brands of vitamin supplements or the latest Netflix series that David would not watch with her anyway. She had become, without quite intending to, an expert in the subtle art of appearing fine. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, she met Kevin. Kevin Fletcher was 40 years old, tall, with a quiet intensity that was immediately noticeable in the chaos of the elementary school pickup line. While the other fathers, most of whom seemed to view childcare as a competitive sport and spent the waiting time He was not handsome in any conventional sense. His nose was slightly too large. His hair was thinning at the temples in a way that suggested he had stopped caring about it years ago. But there was something about his eyes, dark brown, steady, with fine lines at the corners that deepened when he smiled, that made Stacy feel as though he was seeing something in her that no one else had bothered to look for. His son, Marcus, was in Lily's class. Like Stacy, Kevin was usually the one who handled the school pickup, a fact that struck Stacy as both unusual and quietly revolutionary. In the landscape of suburban parenting, where the default assumption was that mothers would handle the invisible labor of raising children while fathers would appear occasionally for the big moments, Kevin was an anomaly. He knew Marcus's teachers' names. He knew the names of Marcus's friends. He showed up. Their first real conversation was about homework. Specifically, it was about a math assignment that both Lily and Marcus had struggled with, and when Stacy mentioned this to Kevin in passing, something like "I guess fractions are harder than they look," he had laughed, a warm, unhurried sound, and said, "Tell me about it. I spent 45 minutes on it last night, and I'm pretty sure I still got it wrong." There was nothing flirtatious about that first conversation. Nothing that would have alarmed a bystander or suggested what was to come. It was just two adults, standing in the October sunlight, complaining about homework, the most mundane of human experiences. But Stacy walked back to her car afterward with her heart beating slightly faster than usual, and when she glanced in the rearview mirror, she saw Kevin watching her go, and something shifted in the air between them, so subtle that neither of them would have been able to name it then, but both of them would recognize it later as the moment everything began. They did not see each other again for almost 2 weeks. Life intervened, school vacations, birthday parties, a work trip that took Kevin to Denver for 4 days, the ordinary logistics of existence that had a way of keeping people safely apart. But they had exchanged phone numbers, ostensibly for the purpose of coordinating playdates for the children, and on a Thursday evening, Stacy received a text from an unknown number that simply read, "Fractions, still losing the battle. How about you?" She stared at the message for a full minute before responding. Part of her wanted to ignore it. She was a married woman, a mother, a person who had made certain choices and lived with the consequences of those choices for more than a decade. She did not need this. She did not want this. But another part of her, a part she had thought had died years ago, was still curious enough, still alive enough, to type back, "I'd say I'm winning, but that would be a lie." His response came within seconds, "Coffee sometime?" Not a date. Just conversation. I could use some adult interaction that doesn't involve discussing the digestive systems of amphibians. She laughed out loud, startling herself with the sound. When was the last time she had laughed? Really laughed, not the polite social laughter she deployed at school functions and neighborhood gatherings, but an actual laugh that came from somewhere genuine? She could not remember. They met the following Saturday at a small coffee shop in the village, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls and a chalkboard menu that promised honest coffee for honest people. Kevin was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting for her. He had remembered, from a passing comment she had made weeks earlier, that she preferred oat milk in her coffee. She found this detail, small, almost insignificant, strangely moving. For 2 hours, they talked. about their children, about their marriages, about the particular loneliness of raising children in a society that seemed designed to isolate parents from each other as much as from their own partners. Kevin spoke about his wife, Catherine, with a kind of weary affection that Stacy recognized as the tone of someone who had long ago stopped expecting much from love but still, out of habit or obligation or perhaps something that resembled conscience, continued to show up. They had been married for 12 years. They were, he said, good partners, but not much else. They did not fight, but they did not really talk either. They had become two people sharing space, sharing responsibilities, sharing a bed they had not shared in years. Stacy found herself telling him things she had not told anyone in years. About the slow suffocation of her marriage. About the way David had become a ghost in their own home, present but invisible, occupying space without filling it. About the loneliness that had crept into her bones like a winter cold that never quite went away. She told him about the yoga classes and the volunteer work and the book she did not remember reading, and as the words came out, she realized how perfectly they mapped onto the landscape of her inner life, how accurately they described the geography of her loneliness. Kevin listened without judgment. He did not try to fix her or minimize her pain or offer the kind of bromides that people usually deployed when confronted with someone else's suffering. He simply listened, and in his listening, he created a space where she felt, for the first time in years, that she might actually exist for someone. "That sounds incredibly lonely," he said, when she had finished speaking. His voice was soft, careful, as though he was handling something fragile. "It is," she said. "It really is." He reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm, slightly rough, real in a way that made her breath catch. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore. Not if you don't want to be." She should have pulled away. She knew that. She should have recognized the danger in his words, in his touch, in the sudden warmth that spread through her chest like a match struck in a dark room. But she did not pull away. She sat there, holding his hand, feeling her own pulse against his, and she thought, "This is either the beginning of something or the end of something, and I am not sure which is more terrifying." As they sat there in that coffee shop with its mismatched furniture and local art and the smell of roasted beans hanging in the air, Stacy felt something shift inside her, a tectonic movement, slow and deep, the kind of shift that happens when the ground you thought was solid reveals itself to be something else entirely. She looked at Kevin across the table and she thought, "He sees me. Not the version of me that smiles at school functions and makes polite conversation and appears to have everything under control. Me. The real me. The one who has been quietly screaming inside for years." And the terrifying thing was that she did not know whether this was salvation or destruction. She did not know whether Kevin was the answer to the prayer she had not known she was making, or whether he was simply another beautiful distraction, another temporary anesthetic that would eventually or often leave her in more pain than before. "You know what's strange," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to think I knew exactly who I was. I used to think I had myself figured out. And now I look at my life and I don't recognize any of it. It's like I'm living someone else's story." Kevin nodded slowly. "I understand that better than you know," he said. "I spent my 20s and 30s building a life that looked right from the outside, the career, the marriage, the kid, the house in the suburbs. And then one day I woke up and I realized I had built all of this and none of it was actually mine. It was just stuff. Stuff I had accumulated because that's what you were supposed to do. And now I'm 40 and I'm still trying to figure out what's actually mine," he said. "What I actually want. What I actually feel." He paused. "Who I actually am." They looked at each other across the table, And in that look was a recognition that neither of them was ready to name out loud, the recognition of two people who had both, in their own ways, ended up in the wrong life and were now standing at a crossroads, knowing that whatever they chose next would define the rest of their days. The barista cleared her throat nearby, and the spell broke. They let go of each other's hands. Kevin paid for the coffee. They walked out into the October afternoon, and as they parted ways in the parking lot, Stacy to her silver Honda CR-V, Kevin to his black SUV, they did not kiss, did not promise to see each other again, did not say anything that would have made what was happening between them any more real than it already was. But they both knew, as they drove away in opposite directions, that this was not the end. It was not even the beginning of the end. It was simply the end of the beginning, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another, the first tentative step onto a path that neither of them could see the end of. The relationship, if that was the right word for it, developed slowly, with all the tentative caution of two people who knew they were playing with fire but could not quite bring themselves to stop. They texted every day, small messages that accumulated into something that felt almost like intimacy, a photo of a sunset over Lake Michigan with the caption "Thought of you," a complaint about a difficult client that ended with "needed to vent to someone who understands," a simple good morning that arrived each morning at 7:15 like clockwork, in which Stacy had begun to anticipate with an eagerness that frightened her. There were phone calls, too, late at night, after the children were asleep and the houses around them had gone quiet. Kevin would call from his home office, where he said he went to get work done, and they would talk for an hour. Sometimes, too, their voices low and intimate, the conversations of two people who had found in each other something they had been missing for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to have it. She learned the topography of his life, the contours of his loneliness, the shape of his regrets, the architecture of his marriage. Catherine, he told her, was a good mother and a decent wife, but she was also a woman who had slowly retreated into her own world over the years, a world that consisted primarily of her career as a pharmaceutical sales representative, her book club, her of women who were all, Kevin suspected, equally unhappy in their marriages but too pragmatic to do anything about it. They slept in the same bed but occupied different universes. They had not made love in 3 years. They communicated through a system of polite negotiation and carefully maintained distances, the kind of communication that two people develop when they have given up on actually talking to each other. "You know what I miss most?" Kevin said one night, his voice low and rough with the intimacy of late-night confessions. "I miss being seen. Not just looked at, seen. Noticed. Remembered. I miss having someone who knows what I'm thinking before I say it. Someone who cares about what kind of day I had. Someone who, when I come home, asks me how I am and actually wants to hear the answer." Stacy felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she did not know whether they were for Kevin or for herself, for the years she had spent in her own marriage being equally invisible, equally forgotten, equally absent from the life she was supposed to be living. "I know exactly what you mean," she said. "I feel like I've been invisible for so long I've started to believe I actually am invisible. Like maybe I dissolved somewhere along the way and no one noticed." "I noticed," Kevin said. "The first time I saw you in that pickup line, I noticed." She closed her eyes. She could feel his voice in her chest, vibrating through her like a tuning fork, adjusting something in her that had been out of tune for years. "What did you notice?" she asked, even though part of her was afraid of the answer. "That you looked tired," he said. "Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time. And I thought, I wonder what she's carrying. I wonder who would be the one to help her put it down. And, did you find an answer?" "I think I'm starting to," he said. They were quiet for a long moment. On the line, she could hear the sound of his breathing, steady and close, like she was lying beside him in the dark. And she thought, this is dangerous. This is the most dangerous thing I have ever done. And I am going to keep doing it anyway, because the alternative is to go back to the life I was living before, and I am not sure I can do that anymore. I am not sure I want to. I should go, she whispered finally. David might. I know, Kevin said. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she repeated. And the word felt like a promise, like a lifeline, like the one small bright thing in the darkness of her ordinary life. She put the phone down on her nightstand and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling her heart beating against her ribs like something caged that was finally starting to remember what freedom felt like. In the guest room down the hall, she could hear David snoring, the dull, rhythmic sound of a man who was not dreaming, who was not wanting, who was simply sleeping the sleep of the completely unconscious. And she thought, he has no idea. He has no idea that I am lying here feeling something for the first time in years, and he would not care if he did know, and that is the most devastating thing about all of this. Not that I am having an affair, but that my husband would not even notice if I stopped. They met for coffee again. And again. And then, as autumn deepened into early winter and the nights grew longer and colder, they began to meet in other places, in the parking lot of a strip mall after the children were in bed, in the corner booth of a restaurant where no one would recognize them, in his car, parked in the underground garage of a shopping center where the fluorescent lights hummed and the silence was absolute. The first time he kissed her, they were sitting in his car in that underground garage, and the world outside had shrunk to the size of the automobile's interior, to the half-light that filtered through the tinted windows, to the sound of their own breathing. She had been talking about Lily, about the anxiety her daughter had been expressing about a school play, about the way children could sense the fractures in their parents' marriages even when those fractures were never spoken aloud, and Kevin had listened, and then he had leaned across the center console and kissed her. It was not a tentative kiss. It was not a questioning kiss. It was a kiss that said, I see you. I want you. I have been wanting you since the moment I saw you in the pickup line, and you were the only person in the world who looked like you were actually, genuinely alive. She kissed him back, and in that kiss, she felt something inside her, something that had been frozen for so long she had forgotten it existed, began, slowly, to thaw. When they finally pulled apart, her lips were swollen, her heart was pounding, and she was breathing as though she had just surfaced from deep water. Kevin looked at her with an expression she could not quite read, wonder, maybe, or disbelief, or simply the raw hunger of a man who had also been lonely for a very long time, and he said, his voice rough, we should stop. We both know we should stop. I know, she said. But we're not going to. No, she said. We're not. The weeks that followed were a careful, elaborate dance of deception and desire. Kevin would text her during the day, careful messages, nothing that could be discovered, nothing that would raise suspicion, and they would plan their next meeting with the precision of military operatives. A coffee shop here. A parking lot there. His car, parked in the shadows of the underground garage, where they could talk for hours without anyone finding them. And talk they did, about everything and nothing, about the past and the future and the impossible present they were constructing together, brick by brick, lie by lie, kiss by kiss. Kevin told her about his father, a man who had worked himself to death at a job he hated so that his family could have the life he had never been able to give himself. I watched him disappear into that job, Kevin said one night, his voice low in the darkness of the car. I watched him give up everything, his health, his dreams, his marriage, and by the time he died, at 62, he was just this shell. This empty vessel that had spent 40 years going through the motions. And I swore I would not do the same thing, And then I grew up and I did exactly the same thing. Stacy reached over and took his hand. You're not your father, she said. You're still here. You still have time to change things. Do I? He asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that she had not heard before, a rawness that made her chest ache. I'm 40 years old, Stacy. I've been married for 12 years. I have a son. I have a mortgage. I have a life that is so thoroughly enmeshed with Catherine's that I don't even know where I end and she begins. What exactly am I supposed to change? I don't know, she admitted. But I know that what we're doing, what I feel when I'm with you, that's not nothing, Kevin. That's not just physical. That's not just escaping. How do you know? He turned to look at her, and in the half-light of the garage, his face was a study in uncertainty, in doubt, in the particular anguish of a man who wanted to believe but was afraid to. How do you know this isn't just, as you said, physical? How do you know I'm not just chasing something because I'm missing it at home? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she said finally. I don't know if what you feel for me is real. I don't know if what I feel for you is real. I don't know if any of this is real. But I know that when I'm with you, I feel more like myself than I have felt in years. I feel like I'm finally allowed to want something, to need something, to be something other than just this. This person who goes through the motions of life without actually living it. Kevin leaned across the console and kissed her forehead, and the tenderness of the gesture made her eyes sting with tears. You deserve more than what you're settling for, he said. You deserve to be seen, to be wanted, to be loved in a way that actually fills you up instead of leaving you emptier than before. And what about you? She asked. Don't you deserve the same thing? He shook his head slowly. I don't know if I do, he said. I don't know if I've ever done enough, been good enough, present enough, loving enough to deserve something like that. Then let me decide that, Stacy said. Let me be the one to decide what you deserve. And right now, right here, I decide that you deserve this. Whatever this is. Even if I don't understand it. Even if we don't know where it's going. I decide that you deserve to be wanted, and I want you, Kevin. I want you so much it scares me. He kissed her then, properly this time, deeply, with a kind of desperate tenderness that told her everything she needed to know about where his heart was, even if his mind was still trying to protect him from it. And in that kiss, she felt something click into place, not just desire, not just passion, but something deeper, something more structural, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. The physical relationship, when it finally began, was both everything she had imagined and nothing she had expected. They were together for the first time in a hotel room in Oak Brook, a business traveler kind of place with clean sheets and neutral-colored walls and a minibar that Kevin had emptied of everything except 2 bottles of water. Stacy had agonized for hours about what to wear, what to say, whether she should bring protection. But what kind of protection could she possibly bring that would not imply she had expected this? And in the end she had simply shown up, as she always did, carrying nothing but the weight of her own anticipation. He met her at the door. He did not say anything. He simply pulled her into the room and into his arms and kissed her with a thoroughness that left no doubt about what was about to happen. The act itself was, Stacy struggled to find the right word for it, even in the privacy of her own thoughts, revelatory. She had not been with anyone other than David in nearly 15 years, and David's technique, if it could be called that, had always been perfunctory, mechanical, more about achieving a specific physical outcome than about any genuine connection with another person. But Kevin touched her like she was new. Like she was the first. Like he was trying to memorize every inch of her skin with his fingertips. He was, she realized, a man who paid attention, who noticed things, who remembered that she liked her coffee with oat milk, and who knew, without being told, that the spot on her neck just below her ear was especially sensitive. He kissed her there, and she made a sound she had not known she was capable of making, a small, involuntary moan of pleasure that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her body, and he smiled against her skin and said, "There. That's what I wanted to hear." She lay back on the hotel bed and let herself be touched, let herself be seen, let herself be wanted in a way that she had forgotten was possible. And as his hands moved over her body with a patience and an attention that bordered on reverence, she thought, "This is what I have been missing." Not just the physical sensation, though that was extraordinary in its own right, but the attention, the care, the sense that she was not just a body being used, but a person being loved. "I don't want to rush this," Kevin murmured against her skin. "I want to remember every second." "Then take your time," she whispered back. "We have all night." And he did. He took his time in a way that seemed almost ceremonial, as though he was conducting a ritual that neither of them fully understood but both of them needed. He kissed her mouth, her neck, her shoulders. He traced the curve of her waist with his fingertips like he was following the lines of a map that he intended to memorize. He moved lower, pressing his lips to her stomach, her hips, the inside of her thighs, and she lay there feeling things she had forgotten she was capable of feeling, sensations that seemed to radiate outward from the points where his body met hers and spread through her entire being like ripples in a pond. When he finally entered her, it was slow, deliberate, a gradual claiming that gave her body time to adjust to the intrusion of another person after so many years of absence. And even then, even in that moment of ultimate physical connection, it was not the physical sensation that undid her, it was the look in his eyes. He was looking at her with an expression of such naked want, such unguarded desire, that she felt as though he was seeing not just her body but her soul, every hidden corner, every secret shame, every lonely night she had spent in her empty marriage, feeling as though she was slowly ceasing to exist. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're so beautiful." And she believed him. For the first time in years, for maybe the first time in her entire life, she believed that she was beautiful. Not because he said so, but because the way he looked at her made it impossible to doubt. They moved together slowly, finding a rhythm that was neither rushed nor hesitant, a rhythm that seemed to emerge organically from the unique chemistry of their bodies and their hearts. She wrapped her legs around him and pulled him deeper, and he made a sound, low, guttural, almost pained, that told her he was feeling it too, whatever it was, this thing between them that was so much more than just physical. Afterward, they lay together in the strange half-light of the hotel room, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. She could hear his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady, slow, real, and she thought, "This is what it is supposed to feel like. This is what I have been missing. This is what I did not even know I was allowed to want." "You're thinking too loud," Kevin said, his voice drowsy with satisfaction. "I can hear it from here." "Sorry," she said. "Just processing." He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "What are you processing?" "That this actually happened. That you're actually here. That I'm not dreaming." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender that it made her chest ache. "You're not dreaming," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not unless you want me to." "Don't go," she said. The words came out more desperately than she had intended, more needy, more raw. But she did not care. For the first time in years, she was not going to calculate the cost of her own honesty. He held her tighter. "I'm not going anywhere," he said again. And she let herself believe him. She let herself sink into the warmth of his body and the certainty of his words and the intoxicating possibility that what they had was real, was permanent, was the beginning of something that could fill the hollow spaces in both of their lives. She let herself believe, even though some small voice in the back of her mind was whispering, "Be careful, Stacy. Be very careful." Men always sound like this in the moment. Men always say exactly what you want to hear when they are inside you. And then they go home to their wives and their children and their other lives, and they forget every promise they made. But she ignored the voice. She pushed it down into the same deep place where she had buried all her other doubts and fears and painful truths. She told herself that she was allowed to have this, that she deserved this, that whatever happened next, at least she would know what it felt like to be truly wanted by someone who saw her for who she really was. And for a while, for a beautiful, shining, dangerous while, she was right. In the days and weeks that followed, Stacy began to feel as though she had been asleep for a decade and was only now, finally, waking up. She moved through her ordinary life, the school runs, the grocery shopping, the dinners she prepared for David and Lily with mechanical precision, but beneath the surface of that ordinary life, something extraordinary was happening. She was alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. She was feeling things, desire, anticipation, joy, a kind of giddy terror that made her feel like a teenager with a secret crush. Kevin was careful. He was thoughtful in ways that she found almost overwhelming. He never called her after 9 p.m. because he did not want his absence to be noticed. He never posted anything on social media that could connect them. He never, not once, made her feel as though she was a secret he was ashamed of. On the contrary, he seemed to take a quiet pride in their relationship, a satisfaction that he expressed not through grand gestures but through small, accumulated details. The way he always wanted to know about her day, the way he remembered the names of her friends and asked after them by name, the way he looked at her sometimes, across a crowded room at a school event or a neighborhood party, with an expression that made her feel as though they were the only two people in the world. But there were moments, brief, passing moments when the facade of normalcy slipped and she caught a glimpse of the structural fragility beneath, when she wondered whether she was building something real or merely renting a temporary escape from her own loneliness. One night, lying in bed after David had fallen asleep in the guest room and she was supposed to be doing the same, she texted Kevin, "Do you ever worry that this is just physical for you? That you're just chasing something?" His response came after a long pause, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, long enough for her to spiral into the worst-case scenarios that her anxious mind was always ready to supply. But when it finally arrived, it read, "I worry about that more than you know. I worry that I'm not good enough for this. That I'm not good enough for you. That I'll screw this up somehow because that's what I always do. But then I think about you and I can't imagine my life without you in it, and I think, hope, that maybe this is more than just physical. Maybe this is the real thing I've been missing too." She read the message 3 times. She saved it to her phone. She went back to it again and again in the weeks that followed, whenever she felt the familiar doubts creeping in. But even as she clung to his words, she could not entirely silence the voice in her head that whispered, "Men always say what you want to hear. Men are experts at telling women what they need to hear in the moment, and then going home to their wives and children and forgetting all about the promises they made in the dark." She told herself it was different with Kevin. She told herself that Kevin understood her in a way that David never had, that Kevin saw her as a person rather than as a fixture of his domestic landscape. She told herself that what they had was special, unique, built on something more durable than mere physical attraction. And maybe it was. Or maybe she was simply telling herself stories because the alternative, the possibility that she had risked everything for an affair that was, at its core, no different from any other affair, was too painful to contemplate. There were moments of doubt that came at the strangest times. Sitting in the yoga class she did not enjoy, trying to hold a pose that her body was not built for, she would suddenly think about Kevin and feel a wave of longing so intense it nearly knocked her over. And then, just as quickly, she would think about Catherine, Kevin's wife, a woman she had never met but whose existence she was acutely, painfully aware of, and she would feel a corresponding wave of guilt that was almost physical in its intensity, a kind of nausea of the soul that made her want to crawl out of her own skin. She would lie awake at night, unable to sleep, running through the calculus of what she was doing and what it would cost her if she were discovered. Her marriage, already a shell, already a performance, was the least of her concerns. It was Lily she thought about. Lily, who was 7 years old and still believed that her parents were normal, that her family was functional, that the world was a safe and predictable place. If Lily ever found out what her mother had done, had been doing, the betrayal would shape her understanding of love and trust and loyalty for the rest of her life. But then Kevin would text her, first thing in the morning, with a simple good morning, beautiful, that made her feel seen and wanted and alive in a way that nothing else in her life did, and all of those concerns, the guilt, the fear, the awareness of what she was risking, would recede into the background, muffled by the sheer force of how good it felt to feel something again. That was the most terrifying part, she realized. Not the affair itself. Not the risk of discovery. But the fact that she had become someone who would risk her daughter's sense of security, the only thing in her life that she still considered sacred, in order to feel this. This high. This intensity. This reminder that she was still a woman, still a person, still someone who was capable of wanting and being wanted. She did not know if that made her brave or selfish. She suspected it made her both. She suspected that most of the important choices in life required you to be both, at the same time, and that the only people who managed to avoid this particular trap were the ones who had never truly wanted anything at all. The months that followed were, in their own complicated way, the happiest of Stacy's adult life. She and Kevin had found a rhythm, a pattern of clandestine meetings and stolen moments that gave her life a structure and meaning it had not had in years. They saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. They talked every day, sometimes for hours, the boundaries between texting and phone calls blurring until she was not always sure which she preferred. He told her about his past, the women he had loved before Catherine, the choices he had made that he regretted, the ways in which he had failed to be the person he had once imagined he would become. She listened to these confessions with a hunger that surprised her. She did not judge him. She did not compare herself to the women who had come before. She simply wanted to know him, every part of him, including the parts he was ashamed of. "I was not a good man in my 20s, Kevin said one night, his voice low in the darkness of the hotel room. "I chased a lot of women. I hurt people. I told myself it was just being young, just sowing my wild oats, but the truth is I was afraid of anything real. I ran from it. Every time things started to get serious, I'd find a reason to leave." "And now?" Stacy asked. "Now I'm 40 years old and I've been married for 12 years and I've spent most of that marriage feeling like I was slowly disappearing," he said. "And then I met you and I felt, for the first time in longer than I can remember, like I was actually alive. Like I was actually present in my own life." She probed herself up on her elbow and looked at him. In the half-light, he looked older than his years, more weathered, more tired. "So what does that mean for us?" she asked. He reached up and touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "It means I don't want to run anymore," he said. "It means I want to see where this goes. Even if it's complicated. Even if it's scary. Even if it hurts someone. Even then," he said. "I can't promise you that I'm going to leave Catherine. I can't promise you that we're going to end up together. But I can promise you that what I feel for you is real. That you're not just a body to me. That you are the first person in my life who has made me feel like I might actually be capable of being in love." She kissed him then, and she did not say what she was thinking, that she had been in love with him for months, that she had been falling since the moment he took her hand in that coffee shop, that she was no longer certain she could survive losing him. But even as she kissed him, even as she let herself melt into the warmth and the certainty of his words, that other voice, the small, persistent, unwelcome voice that always told her the truth she did not want to hear, whispered, "He can't promise you those things because he doesn't actually know if they're true. He is feeling what he's feeling in this moment, and it is real, but men are capable of feeling things in the moment that they cannot sustain over time. Men are capable of meaning what they say in the dark and then taking it back in the daylight. Don't build your life on the foundation of what a man tells you when he is inside you. That is the most unstable ground there is." She ignored the voice. She had gotten very good at ignoring it over the months. She had learned to smother it with Kevin's words, with his promises, with the evidence of his attention and his care and his consistent, unwavering presence in her life. She had learned to believe that what they had was different, was special, was the real thing that she had been missing all along. And maybe it was. She would never know for certain. That was the cruelty of love she was learning, the impossibility of ever really knowing whether the person you gave your heart to was capable of giving you theirs in return, or whether you were simply another stop on a journey they would eventually complete with someone else. The end came, as ends often do, not with a dramatic confrontation but with a single, devastating moment of clarity. It happened in March on a Sunday afternoon. Kevin had come over to help with some repairs around the house, a plausible excuse that had become one of their standard cover stories, and they had ended up in the master bedroom, which they rarely did because of the risk of being caught, the bedrooms in suburbia being the sites of so many potential discoveries. But that afternoon, David was at a client's open house, and Lily was at a friend's house for a playdate, and the house was empty, and they had not seen each other in 4 days, and the need was too great to resist. The sex was frantic, desperate, the kind of sex that happens when two people have been wanting each other for too long and the restraint finally breaks. Stacy had not planned for this, for the risk of being in her own bed, in the room where she was supposed to sleep next to her husband, in the space that was supposed to be sacred and private and hers. But Kevin's hands were on her body and his mouth was on hers, and she could not think, could not plan, could not be anything other than a woman who needed to feel something real after years of feeling nothing at all. Afterward, Stacy lay on her back on her own bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar post-coital glow that she had come to associate with Kevin, when she noticed something on the nightstand. A receipt. Folded in half. She did not remember putting it there. She picked it up, unfolded it. It was from a pharmacy in Naperville, dated 2 days earlier. The purchase, a home pregnancy test. Her heart stopped. She looked at Kevin. He was lying beside her, his eyes closed, his expression peaceful, and for a moment she could not speak. The words would not come. The world would not stop spinning. "Kevin," she said, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears, too calm, too controlled. "What's this?" He opened his eyes, looked at what she was holding, and his expression did not change. "Pregnancy test," he said. "Yours?" He sat up, ran a hand through his hair. "Catherine and I have been trying for another baby," he said. "We've been trying for almost a year. She can't get pregnant. The tests aren't conclusive, but the doctors think there might be an issue with his." He stopped. "With my fertility." Stacy stared at him. The pieces were rearranging themselves in her mind, clicking into place with a horrible precision. "You've been trying to get Catherine pregnant," she said slowly, "while you've been sleeping with me. Without protection. Stacy. How many times?" Her voice was rising despite her efforts to control it. "How many times have we been together without protection?" "A lot," he said. I know how it sounds. And you never told me. I didn't think. You didn't think I had a right to know that you were potentially exposing me to STIs, to pregnancy, to..." She could not finish. She was shaking. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold the receipt. Kevin reached for her. "Stacy, please. Let me explain." She pulled away from him. She got out of bed. She pulled on her clothes with hands that would not stop trembling. "You need to leave," she said. "I know you're upset." "I'm not upset, Kevin. I'm done. Do you understand? I'm done." He tried again to touch her, to hold her, to say something that would fix what had just broken between them. But she would not let him. She stood at the bedroom door with her arms wrapped around herself, feeling the walls of her own home closing in on her, and she thought, "This is what I get. This is what I deserve." I let myself believe it was different, and it wasn't. It was never different. Kevin dressed quickly. He stood in front of her, his face a map of regret and confusion and something else, something that looked almost like relief, as though some part of him had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the inevitability of being found out, waiting for the permission to stop pretending that what they had was anything more than a physical escape from two lives that were fundamentally broken. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I know I should have." "Yes," she said. "You should have. Stacy. Go home, Kevin. Go home to your wife and your son and your fertility problems and your other life. That's where you belong. That's where you always belonged. I was just a way to pass the time. A distraction. Something to make you feel alive while you were waiting to feel alive with her. That's not true." "How do I know that?" Her voice cracked on the question, and she hated herself for the crack, for the vulnerability, for the fact that even now, even after everything, some part of her was still hoping he would say something that would make this better. "How do I know anything is true? How do I know this wasn't, all of it, just something you told me because it was what I wanted to hear?" Kevin did not answer. He stood there, looking at her with those dark brown eyes that had seemed so steady, so sure, so different from David's vacant gaze, and she searched his face for something, some sign, some indication, some proof that what they had was real. But she could not read him. She could not tell what he was thinking. And she realized, with a sickening lurch of her stomach, that she had never really been able to read him. She had just assumed. She had just believed. She had projected onto him the man she wanted him to be, and she had called that love. He left. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the front door open and close, heard his car start in the driveway and pull away. And then there was silence, the silence of her empty house, the silence that had been the soundtrack of her life for years and which now felt more oppressive than ever before. She went to the bathroom. She took a pregnancy test. 2 lines. Positive. The world tilted. She gripped the edge of the sink and stared at the test in her hand, the cheap plastic wand, the 2 pink lines that had just changed everything, and she felt, paradoxically, both completely numb and overwhelmingly terrified. She was pregnant. By Kevin. By a married man who could not even be honest with her about his fertility problems. By a man who had told her he loved her and then had gone home to try to impregnate his wife. She sat down on the bathroom floor. The tile was cold and hard, and she pressed her back against the wall and pulled her knees up to her chest and cried. She cried in a way she had not cried since she was a child, great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her body, from some place she had not known existed. She thought about calling Kevin. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about calling the crisis helpline number on the back of the test wrapper. She did none of these things. She sat on the floor and cried until she had no tears left, and then she sat there in the silence, feeling the faint, phantom ache of new life beginning somewhere inside her, and she thought, I cannot do this. I cannot have this baby. I cannot raise a child with David knowing it is Kevin's. I cannot tell David the truth. I cannot live with the lie. I cannot bring a child into the world whose father is a man who could not even be honest with the woman he was sleeping with. I cannot give this child a life built on the foundations of my own selfishness and Kevin's cowardice and the systematic destruction of 2 marriages. She knew, even as she thought it, that she was making the decision in a state of emotional crisis, that she was not thinking clearly, that the abortion she was contemplating was not just a medical procedure but a moral act that she would have to live with for the rest of her life. She knew all of this, and she did it anyway because she could not see any other way forward. She was already drowning, and the pregnancy was simply one more thing pulling her under. She made the appointment the next morning. Planned Parenthood in Evanston. The following week. She told no one. She went through the motions of her ordinary life, driving Lily to school, making breakfast, attending a work event for David that required her to smile and be charming and pretend that everything was fine. And the whole time she felt as though she was watching herself from somewhere outside her own body, a spectator in her own tragedy. And at night, after Lily was asleep, she would lie in her bed and press her hand against her stomach and think about the life growing there, this tiny spark of possibility that she had created with a man she was no longer sure she had ever really known. She would think, you were the best thing that could ever come out of the worst thing I have ever done. And I cannot keep you. I cannot give you a life built on lies. And I am so sorry. The days that followed were the darkest of Stacy's life. She did not tell Kevin about the pregnancy. She did not tell anyone. She made an appointment at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Evanston for the following week, and she did not tell anyone about that either. She went through the motions of her ordinary life, driving Lily to school, making dinners, attending a parent-teacher conference where she smiled and nodded and said all the right things while feeling as though she was watching herself from somewhere outside her own body. Lily had noticed something was wrong. Children were like that, Stacy had learned, acutely sensitive to the emotional weather in their own homes, attuned to the unspoken tensions that adults thought they were hiding. Lily had been clingier than usual, more prone to tantrums, more likely to cry over small disappointments that she would previously have shrugged off. She had been waking up in the middle of the night and coming into Stacy's room, into the bed that Stacy now slept in alone since David had long ago retreated to the guest room, asking, in a small, worried voice, "Mommy, are you sad?" Stacy would gather her daughter in her arms and say, "No, sweetheart. Mommy's fine. Mummy's just tired." And Lily would look at her with those clear, innocent eyes, David's eyes. Stacy realized, the same shade of blue, the same particular way of narrowing when she was suspicious, and say, "You don't look fine, Mommy. You look like you're going to cry." Stacy would smile. She would smooth Lily's hair. She would say, "Don't worry, baby. Everything is going to be okay." And Lily would nod, satisfied for the moment, and climb back into bed, and Stacy would lie awake for another hour, another 2, staring at the ceiling, feeling the life inside her like a small, insistent heartbeat that she was going to have to silence. She thought about David more than she had thought about him in years. She thought about who he was, who she had married, what they had once been to each other before the slow erosion of their connection had left them as they were now, two people who shared a house and a child and almost nothing else. She thought about the early days of their marriage, when they had been young and hopeful and sure that their love would last forever. She thought about the moment she had first realized that David had stopped seeing her, cruelly seeing her, and how that realization had felt like a slow death, like watching a color slowly fade from the world until everything was gray. She wondered if she had ever really loved David, or whether she had simply loved the idea of him, the successful man, the provider, the father of her children, and whether the reason their marriage had crumbled so quietly was not that he had failed her but that she had never fully shown up for it in the first place. She wondered if the affair with Kevin was not a symptom of her marriage's failure but a symptom of her own deeper failure, the failure to be present, to be honest, to be brave enough to demand what she wanted before she went looking for it somewhere else. She did not know. That was the worst part. She did not know who she was anymore, or what she wanted, or whether she was capable of the kind of self-reflection that would be required to change any of it. The night before the procedure, Stacy sat in her living room with a glass of wine and her phone in her hand. Kevin had texted her again, multiple times, a string of messages that ranged from apologetic to desperate to something that sounded almost like love, and she had read none of them. She had looked at his name on the screen, at the little blue bubble that represented his presence in her life, and she had felt nothing. Not anger, not longing, not the familiar ache of desire. Nothing. As though whatever capacity for feeling he had awakened in her had been killed by that single moment in the bedroom when she had realized she did not know him at all. She thought about texting him, about telling him about the pregnancy, about asking him if he really loved her, if what they had was real, to leave Catherine and be with her, to raise this child together, to build a real life, an honest life, a life that was not built on lies and secrets and the systematic betrayal of everyone around them. But even as she thought about it, she knew she would not do it, because she did not trust him, because she did not believe he would do it, because she had learned, in the space of that one devastating afternoon, that she could not count on Kevin to be the person she needed him to be. He was a man who could not even be honest with her about his fertility problems. What else was he hiding? What else had he lied about? What else did she not know? And even if he did leave Catherine, even if he did come to her, what would they be building? A relationship founded on betrayal. A family built on the wreckage of two other families. A life together that would be poisoned from the start by the knowledge of how it had begun. She could not do it. She could not build a life on that foundation. She was many things, lonely, desperate, selfish, perhaps even a little bit broken, but she was not capable of that particular kind of cruelty. She would not do to Catherine what Catherine had done to no one. She would not build her happiness on the deliberate destruction of another woman's marriage. She poured the wine down the drain. She went to bed. She did not sleep. The abortion itself was a blur. She had expected pain, and there was pain, but there was also something else, a strange, hollow numbness that seemed to spread outward from the center of her body until she could not feel anything at all. She thought, as the procedure was happening, about the life that was being taken from her, the child that would never exist, the person she would never get to know. She thought about Kevin and whether he would have wanted to keep it. She thought about David and what he would do if he ever found out. She thought about her mother and whether she would ever understand. She thought about Lily. She thought about how Lily would never know that she had almost had a sibling, that there had been a brief, flickering moment when the Mercer family might have been 4 instead of 3. She thought about the grief of that, the grief of a child she would never hold, never name, never watch grow up, and she felt it settle into her bones like a cold that would never fully go away. The nurses were kind. They were professional and gentle, and they did not judge her, and she was grateful for that, more grateful than she could say. One of them, a woman about her age with dark hair and a soft voice, held her hand during the procedure and said, "You're going to be okay. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are." Stacy wanted to believe her. She closed her eyes and focused on the feeling of the nurse's hand in hers, the warmth of another human being, the simple comfort of not being alone, and she tried to convince herself that this was true, that she was going to be okay, that this was not the end of her story but simply the darkest chapter, the one she would have to get through before she could begin to see any light. But even as she held on to that hope, she could feel it slipping, could feel the darkness closing in around her like the walls of a room that was getting smaller and smaller until there was no room left to breathe. Afterward, she lay in the recovery room with a heating pad on her stomach and tears streaming down her face, and she felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. The room was small and clinical and smelled of antiseptic, and the only sound was the distant hum of the ventilation system and the muffled traffic from the street outside. She stared at the ceiling tile, white, slightly stained, arranged in a perfect grid that was almost comical in its mundanity, and she thought, "I am 37 years old and I am lying in a clinic and I have just ended a pregnancy and I don't know who I am anymore." Kevin had offered to come. He had texted her that morning, "I know you're angry. I know I have no right to ask. But if you want me there, I'll be there. Just say the word." She had not responded. She had deleted the message. And now, lying in this sterile room with the distant sound of traffic filtering through the window, she wondered if she had made a mistake. She wondered if she was being too hard on him. She wondered if, in her anger and her pain, she was throwing away something that could have been salvaged, something that could have become real if she had only been brave enough to fight for it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kevin, "I'm in the parking lot. I know you told me not to come. I'm here anyway. I'll wait as long as it takes." She stared at the message. Part of her wanted to walk out of that clinic and find him and let him hold her and tell her that everything was going to be okay. Part of her wanted to never see him again. Part of her was so exhausted, so drained, so utterly spent that she could not imagine making any decision at all. In the end, she texted him, "I'm okay. You should go home." "I'm not leaving," he replied. She did not respond. She put her phone away and closed her eyes and waited for the feeling to come back into her body, waited for the anesthesia to fully wear off, waited to feel like a person again instead of this hollow shell that was all that remained of the woman she had been before this day. She must have drifted off, because when she opened her eyes again, an hour had passed and the light in the room had changed. The afternoon sun was slanting through the window at a lower angle, casting long shadows across the floor. She felt slightly better, not good, not even okay, but slightly less like she was about to dissolve into nothing. She got dressed slowly, carefully, her body protesting every movement with a dull, cramping ache. She walked to the lobby on unsteady legs, supported by a nurse who had volunteered to escort her out. And there, sitting in one of the plastic chairs that lined the walls of the waiting room, was Kevin. He looked terrible, his eyes red-rimmed, his face haggard, as though he had aged 10 years and an hour since she had last seen him. He stood up when she came through the door, and she could see that he had been crying, and the sight of him broke something in her that she had not known was still intact. He drove her to a hotel in Oak Brook, not the same hotel where they had been together for the first time, but a different one, a different room, a different context. He helped her inside. He made her lie down. He sat beside her on the bed and held her hand and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. The hours passed with the slow, syrupy quality of time that is being lived at the bottom of a well. The light outside the window shifted from afternoon gold to evening purple to the absolute darkness of a March night. Kevin's phone buzzed again and again, Catherine, no doubt, wondering where he was, why he had not come home. He silenced it. He did not look at it. He kept holding Stacy's hand, and he kept not speaking, and the silence between them was its own kind of conversation, a dialogue conducted entirely in the language of presence and absence, of staying and leaving, of all the things that could not be said but somehow needed to be. Around 8 p.m., Kevin ordered room service, a simple meal of soup and bread that neither of them was particularly hungry for but which served as an excuse to break the silence, to have something to do with their hands, to pretend, for a moment, that they were just two ordinary people sharing a meal in a hotel room instead of two people sitting at the wreckage of something that had once seemed like it could be everything. "Eat something," Kevin said softly. "I'm not hungry." "I know. But you need to." "Why are you here?" she asked. The question had been building for hours, for days, for months. "Why didn't you just go home?" Kevin set down his spoon. He looked at her, and she could see him choosing his words, weighing each one, being careful in a way that only someone who has already said too many careless things knows how to be. "Because I love you," he said. "And I know you don't believe me right now. I know I have given you every reason not to believe me. But I do. I love you. And I couldn't leave you alone. Not today. Not after everything." Stacy felt the tears rise again, and she did not fight them. She was too tired to fight them. "How do I know that's true?" she asked. "How do I know you're not just here because you feel guilty? Because you got me pregnant and I had an abortion and you think this is how a good person is supposed to behave?" "I don't know," Kevin said honestly. "I don't know if what I feel is love or guilt or some combination of both. I've spent the last few days trying to figure that out and I haven't been able to. All I know is that I could not sit at home with Catherine and watch television and pretend that everything was fine. All I know is that the only place I wanted to be was here. With you." "That's not an answer." "I know," he said. "I don't have a better one. I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly. "I don't know if what you did is forgivable. You kept something from me that you should have told me. Something that could have affected my health, my body, my future. And I don't know how to get past that." Kevin nodded. He did not defend himself. He did not make excuses. He simply sat there, absorbing the weight of what she was saying, taking it into his body like a man who had finally stopped running from the consequences of his own actions. "I understand," he said. "I wouldn't forgive me either." "So what do we do now?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I don't know what happens next. I don't know how we go back to what we were before, assuming we can, assuming we want to. I don't know anything except that I am sitting here, with you, and I do not want to be anywhere else." The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and insufficient, like flowers offered to someone who had already decided to leave. Kevin's phone buzzed again. And again. He silenced it each time, but on the fourth or fifth time, he finally picked it up and looked at the screen, and she saw his face change, a subtle shift in his expression, a slight tightening around his eyes, and she knew before he said anything that Catherine had texted him something important. "I have to answer this," he said, not looking at her. "It's Catherine. She's asking where I am. She's worried." Something cold settled in Stacy's chest. She had known. She had always known that Kevin would go home eventually, that he would walk out of this hotel room and drive back to his wife and his son. And she had let herself believe, for a little while, that love was stronger than marriage. It was not. It was never going to be. Answer it, she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. Go home, Kevin. He looked at her, his phone still in his hand. Stacy. Go home to your wife, she said again. Be with your son. Figure out what you want your life to look like. And when you figured that out, if you figure it out, maybe we can talk. Maybe we can figure out what this was. But right now, I can't be the reason you stay. I can't be the reason you don't go home. I can't be the reason you don't face whatever it is you need to face. Stacy, please. She put her hand up. Go, she said. Please. Just go. He stood up. He put his phone in his pocket. He walked to the door, and then, before he left, he turned back and looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that might have been love but might also have been guilt, and she realized that she no longer knew the difference, had perhaps never known the difference, had perhaps been fooling herself into believing that what they had was something it was not. Stacy, he said. I am so sorry. For everything. I know, she said. Go home, Kevin. The door closed behind him. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, heard the elevator ding, heard the silence settle back over the room like a blanket. And then she was alone, truly alone, in a way that she had not been alone in months, and the loneliness was so vast, so total, that it seemed to fill the entire room, the entire hotel, the entire world. She lay there in the dark, feeling the physical pain in her body and the emotional pain in her heart, and she thought about all the things she had wanted and all the things she had lost and all the things she had never had in the first place. She thought about David and whether he would ever know what she had done, what she had risked, what she had lost. She thought about Kevin and whether he would ever understand why she could not just forgive him and move on. She thought about her daughter, Lily, and whether she would grow up to make the same choices her mother had made, to chase the same illusions, to end up in the same kind of darkness. And she thought about the question that had been haunting her since the moment she read that receipt. Do men fall in love, or do they just chase physical pleasure? She did not have an answer. But she knew one thing, she was not the same woman who had stood in that elementary school pickup line in October and looked at Kevin Fletcher for the first time. That woman had been lonely, yes. Had been trapped, yes. Had been desperate and unfulfilled and slowly disappearing inside her own life. But she had also been whole. She had been intact. She had been someone who, for all her pain, still believed that the world was basically comprehensible, that people were basically good, that love was basically real. Now she was none of those things. Now she was a woman who had lost a child she would never hold. Now she was a woman who had given her heart to a man who could not leave his wife. Now she was lying in a hotel room in Oak Brook, Illinois, in the middle of the night, feeling the emptiness of her own emptiness like a physical presence in the room, and she did not know how to fill it. She turned onto her side. She pulled the hotel blanket up to her chin. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, and for a few minutes, mercifully, she succeeded. When she woke up, it was 4 a.m. and the room was dark and her body was aching and her heart was a stone in her chest and she was exactly, precisely, devastatingly alone. She got up. She got dressed. She left the hotel and walked to her car, the March air sharp and cold against her face. She drove home in the early morning darkness, and when she pulled into her driveway, the porch light was on, the light she always left on for David, and the sight of it made her feel something she could not name. Not love. Not forgiveness. Not hope. But something. Something small and faint and fragile, like the first green shoot pushing through frozen ground. She went inside. The house was quiet. David was asleep in the guest room. Lily was asleep in her own room. Stacy stood in the hallway for a long moment, looking at her daughter's door, feeling the weight of what she had almost thrown away. She went to bed. She slept for a few hours. And when she woke up, it was morning and Lily was knocking on her door asking for breakfast, and Stacy walked to the kitchen, and she began again. The weeks that followed were a kind of purgatory. Kevin texted her again and again, and she did not respond. He called, and she sent him to voicemail. He sent flowers to her house, which terrified her, because what if David had been home? What if Lily had answered the door, and she threw them in the trash without opening the card? She went back to her ordinary life. She drove Lily to school. She made dinners. She sat in the living room in the evening and watched television without really seeing it. She was, on the surface, the same person she had always been, the competent suburban mother, the dutiful wife, the woman who had learned to appear fine even when she was falling apart inside. But beneath the surface, something had broken that she did not know how to fix. There were moments, small, unexpected moments, when the grief would hit her like a wave and she would have to stop what she was doing and find a private place to cry. In the shower. In the car. In the bathroom at the school where she volunteered. She would stand there, in whatever small space she could find, and she would let the tears come, and she would think about the child she had lost, the child she had chosen to lose, the child who existed now only in her memory and in the physical evidence of the procedure she had undergone in a clinic in Edinson on a cold March morning. She did not regret it. That was the strange thing. She knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she had made the right choice. That she could not have raised Kevin's child while living a lie. That she could not have brought a child into the world as a result of an affair that was, itself, built on deception. She knew all of this, and she believed all of this, and still the grief came, wave after wave, like the ocean wearing away at a cliff. She started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Aditi Raman who had an office in Evanston. Dr. Raman listened with a patience that reminded Stacy of Kevin, and asked questions that cut to the heart of things Stacy had been avoiding. "Why did you stay in your marriage?" she asked. "Because I was afraid," Stacy said. "Because leaving would have meant admitting I had failed." "And the affair? Did you love Kevin?" Stacy considered the question for a long time. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I did. But I think I may have been in love with the idea of being in love. I think I built Kevin into someone he wasn't because I needed him to be that person." Dr. Raman nodded slowly. "That may be the most honest thing you've said." Over the following weeks, Stacy began to rebuild herself. She learned to sit with her grief instead of running from it. She learned to forgive herself for the years she had spent disappearing inside her own life. And she began, slowly, to have conversations with David, real conversations, the first real conversations they had had in years, about who they were and what they wanted and whether there was anything left to save. There was not. They both knew it. On a Saturday afternoon while Lily was at a friend's house, Stacy told David she wanted to separate. She did not want a divorce, not yet, but she wanted to stop pretending. David listened, his hands folded in his lap, and when she finished, he said, "I knew. I've known for a long time. I just didn't know how to tell you I knew." They told Lily together that evening. They sat her down and explained, gently, that Mommy and Daddy were going to live in different houses for a while. Lily cried. She asked if it was her fault. Stacy held her and said, "No, baby. This is not your fault. We love you. That will never change." Kevin called her again a month after the abortion. She was in the kitchen making breakfast, and when she saw his name on the phone screen, Her first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But something made her answer, a weakness, maybe, or a need, or simply the exhaustion of holding on to anger for so long. "Stacy," he said when she answered. His voice sounded different. Older, somehow. More tired. "Kevin, I've been thinking about you every day," he said. "I've been thinking about what happened, about what I did, about all the ways I failed you. Kevin, let me finish. Please. I'd been thinking about us, about what we had, about whether it was real or whether I was just chasing something physical, like you said. And I don't have a good answer. I don't know if what I felt was love or just need. I don't know if I'm capable of love the way you deserve to be loved. But I know that losing you has been the hardest thing I've ever been through. And I know that I would do anything to have another chance." Stacy was quiet. She was holding the phone with one hand, and with the other she was gripping the edge of the counter, and she could feel her heart pounding against her ribs like something caged. "I can't give you an answer right now," she said finally. "I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am anymore. I need time to figure that out." "I'll wait," he said. "However long it takes." She hung up. She stood there in the kitchen, looking out the window at the backyard where Lily was playing on the swing set, and she thought about all the choices that had led her to this moment, the choice to stay in her marriage, the choice to have the affair, the choice to have the abortion, the choice to let Kevin back into her life or to keep him out of it. She thought about her mother's advice, which she had never followed. Don't fall in love with someone who can't leave their wife. Don't give your heart to someone who is only passing through. She thought about the stories she had heard from friends, from strangers, from the endless parade of cautionary tales that seemed to be the only education American women received about love and infidelity and the particular dangers of mixing the two. She thought about the question that had started all of this: do men follow their heart or their physical desires? And she realized, finally, that it was the wrong question. The right question was not whether men were capable of love or just lust. The right question was whether she, Stacy Mercer, 37-year-old suburban mother, woman who had spent a decade of her life feeling invisible, was capable of loving herself enough to demand more than what she had been settling for. She did not know the answer. She was not sure she would ever know the answer. But she knew one thing: she was done being the kind of woman who let men define her worth. She was done being the kind of woman who stayed in a marriage that was killing her slowly. She was done being the kind of woman who had affairs with married men and then wondered why she always ended up alone. She walked to the window. She watched Lily swinging higher and higher, her laughter carrying across the yard, and she thought, I am going to figure this out. I am going to find a way to be happy. Not the borrowed happiness of an affair, not the hollow happiness of appearing fine, but something real. Something that belongs to me. It was not much of a plan. It was not even really a beginning. But it was something. And sometimes, she thought, something was all you needed. She turned off her phone. She went outside. She pushed her daughter on the swing, and she listened to Lily laugh, and she felt, maybe for the first time in years, the faint, fragile stirring of something that might have been hope. The sun was warm on her face. The oak tree in the front yard was dropping its leaves in slow, lazy spirals, and Lily was chasing them, trying to catch them, laughing each time one drifted past her. Stacy watched her daughter and thought, this is what I was fighting for. Not Kevin. Not the affair. Not the pregnancy or the abortion. This moment. This child. This life. This chance to be present for something small and ordinary and real. That afternoon, as she was cleaning up the kitchen after lunch, Stacy found herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror again. But this time, when she looked at her reflection, she did not see the hollow-cheeked, sad-eyed woman she had become accustomed to. She saw someone else. Someone who had been through something devastating and had survived it. Someone who had made impossible choices and had lived with the consequences. Someone who was, despite everything, still here. Still standing. Still capable of feeling things, pain and grief and loneliness, yes, but also, occasionally, in small and unexpected moments, something that felt almost like joy. She touched her own face in the mirror. She traced the line of her jaw, her cheekbone, the slight hollow beneath her eye. She looked at herself, really looked, the way Kevin had once looked at her, and she thought, I see you. I see you. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she meant it. She thought about all the women she had known in her life, her mother, her college roommates, the women in her book club, the mothers at Lily's school, who had all, in their own ways, been navigating the same impossible terrain she had been navigating. The marriage that had seemed like it would last forever and then didn't. The desire that had been there at the beginning and then quietly vanished. The choices that had seemed right at the time and then revealed themselves to be something else entirely. She was not alone in this. She had never been alone in this. That was the great lie she had been telling herself for years, that her suffering was singular, that her pain was hers alone, that no one else could possibly understand what it felt like to be her. The truth was that millions of women had stood where she was standing. Millions of women had asked the same questions and arrived at the same impossible crossroads and made the same impossible choices. She was not special in her suffering, but she could be special in how she moved through it. She thought about Kevin. She thought about David. She thought about the baby she had lost and the marriage she had ended and the life she had been living before she had the courage to ask for something more. She did not know what came next. She did not know if she would find love again, or whether the love she had found, with Kevin, with herself, would be enough to sustain her for the rest of her days. But she knew one thing, she would never stop looking. She would never stop wanting. She would never settle again for the kind of life that asked her to be less than she was. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Stacy sat down at her kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. She did not know what she was going to write. She did not know if she was capable of writing anything at all. But she knew that she needed to find a way to put into words what she had been through, what she was feeling, what she had learned about love and men and herself in the process. She wrote, "Do men fall in love, or do they just chase physical pleasure?" And then, beneath it, in smaller letters, she wrote, "Does it matter?" Maybe the more important question is, do women know the difference? And if they don't, if they can't, then maybe the real question is, what does it take to learn how to love someone without losing yourself in the process? She stared at the words for a long time. Then she closed the notebook. She went to bed. And she slept, really slept, for the first time in months, the deep and dreamless sleep of a woman who had finally stopped running from her own life. The next morning, she woke up early. She made coffee. She watched the sun come up over the suburbs of Chicago, the light spreading slowly across the rooftops and the oak trees and the autumn leaves that still clung to the branches, refusing to let go. And she thought, this is my life. This is the only one I have. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was not afraid of it. She was not happy. Not yet. Happiness was still a long way off, a destination she could not yet see from where she was standing. But she was present. She was awake. She was real. She was, for the first time in years, actually living her life instead of just passing through it. And that, she decided, was enough. For now. For this day.